Yeah, you note it, we are live streaming.
Yeah. Okay, 7 p.m. So we'll kick off. Good evening and a warm welcome to the Rushcliffe Borough Council's Governance Scrutiny Group meeting, our February meeting. I would like to remind everyone that the meeting is being live streamed on YouTube. A recording of the meeting will be available afterwards on the Council's YouTube channel. In addition, under the Local Authorities Executive Arrangements, Meetings and Access to Information Regulations 2012, other people may film, record, tweet or blog from this meeting. The use of any such images or sound recordings is not under the Council's control. So again, a very warm welcome and good evening to all. May I say good evening to our members, and this evening we have Councillor Gray to my left, who is Vice Chair of the Governance Scrutiny Group. We have Councillor Sims, Councillor Butler, who will be joining us in just a moment, Councillor Howitt, Councillor Shaw, Councillor Stockwood and Councillor Beardson. So good evening to members of the group. And I also welcome our internal auditors. We have from BDO Gurpreet Dule and also Charlotte Thomas, who will be taking us through the internal audit report and strategy items. Also, welcome to our officers, Sarah Whitaker to my right. Sarah, good evening, who's our Service Manager for Finance. We have from Democratic Services, Tracy Cook, and also Marie here, our Financial Services Manager. So good evening to all. I would like to move on to the main agenda items for this evening. And number one, apologies for absences. Tracy.
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillor Healy and Councillor substitute. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tracy.
Mr. Chairman, can I just give Councillor Adair's apologies? Is that's another meeting?
Thank you, Councillor Butler. So we may expect Councillor Adair during the meeting. Thank you very much. Can I ask members for any declarations of interest before we get into the main agenda items? I don't see any hands up or any declarations, so we'll move on to item number 3, which is the minutes of our meeting held on the 25th of November 2021. Do we have any amendments, observations or comments on those minutes? No? Okay. In which case, we can record that as approved minutes of that meeting, Tracy. Just before we move away from the minutes, then item number 4, there were some outstanding actions from that meeting. And just to clarify, we have had responses and progress on those. I'm sure members have reviewed these, but are there any questions in terms of responses with those actions and the progress made? So thank you very much to officers for coming back in terms of the responses, the clarifications and questions that were raised and actually taken away. We will move on to the substantive items on the agenda in that case, which the first of which is the internal audit progress report. So I'll ask our internal auditors, BDO Gurpreet and his colleague Charlotte, if you could please take us through the report and highlight any key areas of that. Yes, please. Yes, thank you.
Okay, so thanks everyone. We've got a couple of reports. One is our progress report, and then also the 3-year internal audit plan. So the progress report is the first one. This just obviously brings you up to speed with where we are so far in the year. I always find probably the most useful one to look at is the table, which is on page 18 of the packs, of the overall pack. So we have a couple of reports this time coming, one on housing benefits, one on business continuity and disaster recovery, and I'll go through those, but they both have pretty positive opinions, substantial, moderate across both. But actually, when you stand back and look at the wider plan, there's 4 other reviews which are all started, and we're on track to have them all issued, if not finalised, issued as draft, waiting for responses from the 31st of March, which is our kind of overall KPI. So we're on track to finish by the end of the year. And the next meeting that this group has, we would issue those final 4 reports on GDPR, contract management, homelessness, temporary accommodation, health and safety, along with our annual opinion. But at this early stage, I'll say early stage, mid stage, we don't see any kind of major concerns for our overall opinion, which we'll bring to the next meeting. We expect that to be positive, following on from the previous year as well. There is one change to the plan, which you'll see in that table. Originally, this committee had approved a review around the hybrid mail project. I'll talk about this when we talk about the next paper around the 3-year plan, but in agreement with the Director of Finance and the Finance team, that would be in next year's plan, and actually for this year we brought forward a review on health and safety. It just felt the timing along with the wider project management review we were doing made sense for it to be done at that point, and brought forward around health and safety. There's one change there to note. So I'll go on to the 2 reports that we then have completed. There's one on housing benefits. It's a summary on page 19 of your packs. A substantial opinion, which is our highest opinion. We looked at kind of the key areas that you'd expect around housing benefits, around policies, procedures, new claimants, changing circumstances, how overpayments are dealt with, the authority may overpay and how they're rectified, how write-offs are dealt with as part of that process. And what we found was a very strong control environment, and don't have any findings to kind of note to say here are areas of particular improvement. From the testing that we did, there were no errors or omissions that we identified. If you stand back as well, the target time to process claims or new claims is 14 days. The council were operating at the time of the review at 12.88 days as a meeting overall target, and we weren't finding key control gaps or controls not operating around those key checks and verifications that are done. So from our perspective, we felt the control environment is strong. And I'll just pick up the business continuity one and then pause if there are any questions on everything that I've gone through. So on page 21 of your packs is business continuity and disaster recovery. Obviously, clearly going through the pandemic, the authority had arrangements in place, and those arrangements have improved still and been tested in reality as to whether services would fall over or cease to operate in difficult circumstances. And clearly we've had a real life test of that. So we have looked at in this review, what arrangements do the authority have to identify key personnel, how long systems could last if they went down, what policies and procedures in place, and a mixture of real life data of how the authority has actually operated. Obviously, I'm sure councillors will know this authority continued having recycling being picked up, and actually some neighbouring authorities weren't in the same circumstance. And so actually from a continuity point of view, public facing services have continued. So there's no major concerns that we have from that perspective. Testing has occurred and policies and procedures are in place. Where we have noted an area for improvement or a medium finding, one of the key controls is to do business impact assessments across the 7 kind of areas as they're defined. And that identifies what are the risks to this area from continuing and then setting actions against them. The risk has been identified, but not all the actions have been reported. Speaking with the staff, it feels more like an administrative process, and that when they do it, they're not likely to find risks that they didn't have controls against. It's likely if they go through that exercise, it's just that it's not been reported and documented. We've asked the authority to go through that detail for the areas. And obviously, we will follow that up if there are concerns. We'll bring it to your attention. I'm not expecting that to be the case. And for that reason, we've raised a medium finding on that report. There's then the sector update, but I'll pause there. So a bit of ground on the 2 reports, and then also our overall progress. I'm happy to take any questions on those areas.
Thank you very much, Gertrude. From looking at the report and your comments, I mean, the plans appears on track, including those planned moving forwards, before those that you referred to. A quick question from me before I open the floor up to members for further scrutiny. You referenced there one of the sort of issues that you picked up, and I think the rating was given low as a result of it. I know our Director of Finance actually discussed this week. So from my perspective, I suppose in terms of that particular issue you found, in terms of the ratings that you applied, you know, the question I would ask is there a material impact of what you found to be a weakness in terms of rating it as a medium?
Not a material impact. If it was a high, that's where it falls into the category of where we'd say this has a significant chance of causing the objectives of that area not to be met. So we haven't classified it as high. Medium for us means that we do think there is a key or a fundamental control that may not be operating, but we don't think it's so, you know, it's the level of materiality, kind of an external audit term. So medium for us is the right one. A low for us tends to be more, this is best practice. If the authority does this, we think this will kind of be good practice and housekeeping. For this particular one, there was a debate, and I think actually the Director of Finance took a view that probably the finding we've put in this medium may be a low. It's worth reflecting that. We concluded it should be a medium based on what we see other local authorities. They would typically have this in place. And the business impact assessments are a process. It is a process that the council have in place. They've set up this control environment. They've created business impact assessments. So we're almost just saying, actually, this is your own expectation. It's not being met, therefore it's medium. Otherwise, you know, this may not be a valid exercise to do. So from our point of view, I think it's a medium. But a medium is, you know, given what's happened in the last couple of years, to have a that gives the opinion that we've given with only these couple of findings, actually that's way ahead of most local authorities have been.
Okay, well, thank you for clarifying that. I suppose I was trying to understand, as you've actually highlighted, best practice is possibly where you need to know as opposed to medium. And I did have this discussion with Peter, so the debate that took place, but thank you for clarifying that. So can I open up the discussion for our members? Any questions for Gertrude on the progress of the internal audit at the moment, particularly on those 2 areas? Business continuity areas. In which case, Gertrude, I think members have satisfied themselves that the progress being made is satisfactory. And we are asked as a governance group to note the progress reports, which we have duly done, and the clarifications you've given us, so we can minute that as noted.
Brilliant. And then shall we move on to the next page?
Yes, so that moves us on to agenda item 5, which is the internal audit strategy.
So I was just going to say on the previous paper, just that it's not a comment, it's just so you're aware. On page 25 of the pack, we have also this, I don't think it's stretched to say, we're still relatively new to the local authority. And so just to give you assurance, we do get survey feedback after each audit. And in that table, it shows you the 4 most recent ones that we have got. 5 is the highest in terms of the numbers, where the numbers are there, being exceptional. 4 is above average, 3 is the average. And where it's a strongly agree or agree, they're the 2 most positive responses people give. They can either say disagree or strongly disagree. And what I'm pleased to be able to say is every single one of these are 4 and above, and either agree or strongly agree. So there's nothing in the negative scale. So we'll keep kind of trying to make sure we can keep that standard. It's kind of a high bar for us to try and maintain. I'm sure there will be the occasional one where we don't quite get it right, and the scores may be lower. But if it gives some comfort, but we think in conversations we're having and feedback we get that the service is operating some comfort on that one.
Thank you for highlighting that. In terms of the sample size or who's actually involved, who's just clarify.
Yeah, so but when we when we finalise a report, it then goes to the individuals that are involved. So whether that's the individual who signed it off as operational staff, and we'll attach the final report with standard wording, but in there there's a link to a survey wiki, which is the platform that we use. It has the questions, it takes about 3 to 4 minutes to click through. Anybody can complete it, and any responses that we get, we then place into here and then report back.
Thank you. But yes, thank you for highlighting that. That is obviously positive. So thank you. So if we can go on to item number 5, which is the internal audit strategy. So this is presenting to us the plan for 22-23, as well as the strategy for the 22 to 25 timeline. So if perhaps you could take us through what we want to discussion.
So as part of our role as the internal auditors, we're required to provide this committee with a plan setting out what it is that we look at in the following year, but also over 3 years. So I think the focus is probably for the upcoming year, because things may change by the time we get to 12 months from now. So I would suggest and ask committee members to focus on what's in there for next year. But it is covering the next 3 years as well. But just about the process, the way we do this is obviously we have experience of working with lots of local authorities, and we engage with lots of heads of internal audit groups in local authorities and understand the risks that are facing the sector. We then also look at your risk management processes. So you have a corporate risk register, which identifies what you see as the challenges you're facing, and what the document does across page 38 of the pack, page 6 of this report, sets out the different risks in your corporate risk register, and then over the 3 years it sets up what reviews that we feel might work against and trying to review that risk. Because ultimately, from an audit committee perspective, we're here as an arm of this audit committee to try and help give you insights into areas where there are risks that the council are facing and find opinions on those areas. So what that table tries to demonstrate is what we have is a spread across the different risks that the authority faces, and how that maps over the next 3 years. There's 150 days in each year of the audit plans, and in the upcoming year we have some kind of staple reviews, as I call them, that we have in there each year, some main financial systems and an annual fraud report that comes out as well. But the rest are then unique ones based on what we picked up from our assessment. So there's reviews there around risk management within the plan, IT asset management, a part of funded money that the council have received about sustainable warmth. There's a requirement as part of receiving that government funding that you have an independent audit to check what you've received and whether it's been spent in line with conditions, and therefore that could be in the plan. Obviously, the environment is a very topical area, and we see across authorities. Project management, I mentioned earlier, the hybrid mail project that we moved, it's now to form part of that review, and a couple of others around championship and health and well-being. So this sets out the 3 years. I won't go through every one of the reasons why it has read by exception, questions you may have. But critically, it's, do you feel this kind of looks like the right areas to look at? Do you have any thoughts as to actually see likely to come forward from a future year into this year? Our plans are always flexible, and as the current one shows, we've taken one out and moved another one in. That will always be the case. So things can change, but it's whether you feel the process here is appropriate and if the reviews identify our agreeable.
Okay, thank you, Gurpreet. So this is the, I think it's in 2 parts, obviously the 22-23 plan, and then the overall strategy for the next 3 years. So, and we're asked to look at whether the plan covers the key risk profile, does it cover the key risks, and is the coverage appropriate? So I'll open it up to our members in terms of what has been proposed and key areas that Gurpreet has highlighted. Do we feel that that is appropriate in terms of our current risk register, our corporate risks, and aligned to that? What's your sense?
Have you scrutinised this register?
That is in Q1 of next year plan. So
Right, okay.
obviously that review will be in this proposed plan, it's in there to look at all of your risk processes, your strategy, your definitions, how it's recorded, how it's discussed. We have a risk maturity toolkit. We go through the whole process from kind of documentation through to discussions of how it all works and estimated. So at this stage, we haven't done a deep dive in previous years, but we propose it's in Q1 of the upcoming year.
So when you do scrutinise it, do you benchmark against other authorities, or do you just say, right, that's your risks that you've identified? Say if it's very limited and it's approach not robust enough, would you be identifying that, or would you be just saying that's your risk register, or it's against it?
We would it'd be both. So we would look at we would bring on our knowledge that Charlotte's here is a number of these type of risk reviews and really demonstrating in a number of these areas. Look at what the local authorities do, but ultimately use our judgment as to every council does it differently. I mean, from a quick glance, you guys probably have more risks than what we typically see in the local authority listed. Some have a slightly more streamlined approach, but that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It could be, when we get deep dive into it, we'll kind of see whether we feel that's appropriate. So it will be a whole mix.
So if risks are superficial on the register,
We'll flag that. Yeah, we would say. I mean, I don't want to get into that now.
I'm just asking what the
if there was, our kind of core principle would be risk register is there, the fundamental risks to stop this council meeting its objectives. If there are things there, we think actually that's more operational risk and managed by teams, and not necessarily it's a corporate risk. Those kind of observations, I think, we would raise.
Thank you, Councillor Sims. And I mean, that's a very important point, isn't it? Because the whole plan is based on that register. And we did discuss this at a recent meeting in terms of the actual risk register.
Just one correction. Part of the plan is contributed by the risk register.
Yes,
I wouldn't say the whole plan is based on, because we do work with heads of internal audit and other local authorities, and obviously our own experience. We have 30 plus or so local authorities. All of that knowledge feeds into it, as well as the council's risk register. So sorry.
Any other points, Councillor Buckley?
You mentioned that our risk register, I'm looking at the graph, it's only on page 4, I think it is bigger than many other authorities. Is that because of, are they identified because of us looking closely at what the risks are, or is it simply the fact that this authority just has quite a lot of problems?
I can't say until we do our review. I'm not sure. That's just a very quick observation. That's with no context, no conversations. So when we do our review, I actually conclude, no, we agree with the authority with how many you have because of context, challenges, and so on. But just on a very quick observation nature, seems a little bit bigger than typically. I would see that may be a good thing. It may, we may have a different view, but our review will give an opinion.
Right, okay, so that review may say it could be a good thing the authority can identify.
Yeah, but possibly, yeah. I don't want to prejudge what they say here.
Sorry, I'm reviewing.
That's okay.
Any further, Councillor Gray?
So I think the report as laid out shows the process. And I think the suggestions that have been made obviously flow from seems to be very well thought out, very well together. I think also just a quick comment on the last report for us, but it seemed that it was again there was good process shown for yourself, but also ourselves. So perhaps we'll see what's silence. Nothing from the report.
I think Councillor Gray might want to complete your survey. Help the ratings in that further. But a couple of do members have any further questions before I come back? Very quick ones actually from me, Gilbert. You mentioned there are slight changes in terms of the original proposal. Can you just clarify what those are? I think you mentioned the health and safety being swapped in place of I can't remember.
It's a hybrid mail
That's right, yeah.
project.
Yeah,
So-
what were the other ones?
It was just that one. I think that hybrid mail project was in the current year plan and got moved into what is the 2022-23 plan, and health and safety forward into the current year plan. So that will come to your next committee.
Okay.
That was the only change.
So on the health and safety one, my question was also the follow-up is, how did you determine that's the one that gets swapped out? Was that again based on the list register or?
I wasn't directly involved in the conversation, so I don't guess that my colleague was who could support the service with me. I know it was a conversation with the director of finance and Pete and as to what was most appropriate. I think from recollection, they asked our advice as to what may be appropriate to bring forward and practicable. And that was in the previously approved plan by this committee. And so a judgment would have been applied to say, let's bring that forward. I can go back and ask the question. I'd rather not say something that I'm not confident on what the response is. I can find out as rationale on that one.
Thank you. The other one I wanted to pick up on was the new one, and that is sustainable warmth funding. I think that's a new one, isn't it? And perhaps for our benefit, just to highlight what that particular area is as well.
So as I understand it, the Director of Finance contacted us when we were doing the planning, and we had a conversation, and we informed us that the local authority has received, Sarah made the answer, so was in receipt of this government grant, and the condition of the grant is that it required an independent auditor to validate, as the government department want to have somebody independent check, have the council use the money in line with the conditions that are set. We do a number of these types of reviews elsewhere, like such as disabled facility grants. We get funding for that, and it has to be used for individuals to meet certain criteria within a certain financial value, obtain a certain number of quotes, and then we'll see the authorities. So the reason this was requested is because the council have to have an independent auditor, and it's required in a certain time period, and therefore we asked us to put it into this year's plan because it's a requirement. It makes sense for us to do that.
Similar as well to the grants that we had audited last year. Also, it's just reflective really of what you say about this responding to emerging risks as an change.
Okay, thank you. I did have another question, but I've actually answered it myself there, which was I had noted the workforce planning and contract management ones, obviously in the 3-year plan towards the back end of in 2025, but of course your report will be due 2022. So my question was going to be, when was the last time we had those areas, and what's the maximum gap you allow between audits in specific areas?
At the it's all the BDO don't have strict rules. Some firms do, and it's not necessarily our approach. The strict rules that we do have as main financial systems is in every year plan, and with this authority, the full report is also in the plan, but that's not necessarily the case at other authorities. Outside of that, there are no strict rules in terms of the BDO approach. It's a judgment each time. It could be that contract management doesn't get looked at for X number of years thereafter. It's like we don't have a rule that says you have to look at it every 3 years. So we're looking at it, reapplying the judgment, what's the risk each time. I mean, the reality is that areas like contract management and housing benefits or council tax are going to be looked at every couple of years or every 3 years. We're not going to let that go too long, because that would in itself be a risk that our last assurance would give us a certain period of time. So it's part of our thinking. We don't necessarily have a complete kind of fine number of years, because it would hamper our ability to be flexible in developing these plans as well.
Okay. The reason I asked that question was because also in terms of your 3-year plan that you presented to us for our review, again, I would be interested to know from the planning of those audits in the 3-year time frame, are some of them based on, for example, those that may have highlighted issues or have obviously high risk rate? So would they come sooner rather than later?
If we believe the risk is higher, they would come sooner. And that could be either because there's a, like for example, the risk around environmental matters, not necessarily because we think the authority, that's a a change in the risk landscape nationally, rather than we understand there's a control failure of the council, because that's not the case. It's actually the level of interest in that particular area. And from our conversations elsewhere, it's a very, now becomes a higher rate of risk. So where things are more pertinent, things like risk management, so here it is. We haven't looked at that yet. And actually, we can't really leave that too long. We do need to really deep dive because there is a critical area, key function of this committee, and therefore we want that for us then becomes a higher risk. So there's multiple factors. It could be nationwide, it could be local, like the grant fund, it could be something more that's a risk for us, and that we don't want to leave an area too long because that could impact our ability to give an opinion. So we need to know what's happening in that particular area. So it is a judgment and there's a loose answer, but that's our approach deliberately, because we don't want to use strict kind of scoring methodologies why we pick certain things.
Perhaps one for Sarah, actually. Sorry, this will be my my last point on this. But so, Sarah, in terms of that particular strategy, we are asked as members here to review and satisfy ourselves that it's adequate coverage in terms of not only our risk but all of the other factors going into the strategy. Are there any which we ourselves or officers have highlighted that we may want to focus in on or earlier rather than feel free on the teams determining based on other factors?
We certainly do that. We looked at what we raised and worked into the plan necessary. We haven't done that this year. But I think the plan reflects what the council sees as a risk, as well as sector specific risks as well, which the team worked into the plan. But I think it just, at the moment, it will be responsive to anything that did occur and that we felt we needed to go.
It was a loaded question, just in terms of are there any there that we've actually put in there, but it sounds like we haven't, so thank you. Okay, any other questions from members of the group in terms of the internal audit strategy? There is a secondary part to this particular item, and that is the internal audit charter. So asked to review and approve that. So, do you want to perhaps take us through key points on that?
Yeah, so just briefly, it's on page 55 of the overall pack. It's a bit of a technical thing. We've been familiar with this in previous years. As an internal service, we have to each year issue an internal audit charter. It sets out our mission, our purpose, our responsibility, how we deal with things like conflicts, how we remain independent, and fulfill those objectives. And this charter is in line with PSIS, which is the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards. So they set out that we have to issue this charter. It's probably worth just saying, which is probably more of interest to yourselves, BDO as a firm do independently get assessed by the Institute of Internal Auditors every 5 years to assess us against all elements of PSIS. 5 years ago and in the last year, in 2021, which is the previous one, BDO have been judged to have passed every single parameter. So they go and look at all the files, how we reach conclusions, do we have evidence, are we independent, are we following these procedures independent to do that. So that's probably an easier way to get assurance of what we do. The charter is a mandatory document that we issue each year. It's very similar to the previous year. I'm not sure, Chair, how anything further to add on that, really.
No, thank you. And it's in line with public sector funds, I think, with yes, and members have any comments or questions on the charter. We therefore, on our internal audit strategy, are asked to review and approve both the strategy for 22-25 and also the charter that you just referred to. And I think based on the discussion we've had, clearly in terms of the not just the current year plan, 22-23, but also the 3-year plan has been based on a rational approach in terms of be it sector-led or industry-led sort of issues which may determine which area we need to focus on. It's based on our corporate risk register, partly, not fully, obviously, that's not really determined factor. So our members satisfied that the strategy is appropriate, covers the risks for the council, and also the charter supporting charter in terms of principles on the audit. Okay, I don't see any hands to the contrary or any further questions, so we can note that down as approved. Thank you very much, Geoffrey. And I think in terms of your particular item, you are welcome to stay, but we'd say if you want to leave the meeting there, you're free to.
I think we're going to be on. Yeah, so
You're welcome.
thank you.
Thank you very much. We're making good progress this evening, so we'll keep the momentum up. So we'll move on to our item number 6, which is the capital and investment strategy, which is on pages 63 and 90 to 94 of our pack. So if I can ask, is it Sarah yourself or Marie to take us through that?
This report details the capital investment strategy for the next 5 years. SIPRA has recently released new editions of the Treasury Management Code and Prudential Code, and where possible, these changes are reflected in the strategy. Paragraph 5, Appendix A, refers to the capital strategy, and paragraphs 9 to 17 detail the capital prudential indicators. Paragraph 9 shows projected spend and how it is funded. In future years, capital expenditure is financed by capital receipts, grants and reserves. But in the current year, there is a need to internally borrow. This underlying need to borrow, also known as capital finance requirements, is forecast to be around 11 million. The impact of the CFR and internal borrowing and investment balances is shown in Table 2, paragraph 13. Investment balances are reducing at the medium term as resources are used, mitigating the need to borrow. Paragraph 15 discusses a new financial reporting standard, IFRS 16, known as leasing standard, which comes into effect on the 1st of April. This was introduced to ensure that public sector organisations show true liabilities on balance sheets. The impact on RBC is not material. Paragraphs 16 and 17 explain Council's MRP policy and methodology for accounting for cost of borrowing, which must be charged to the revenue account. Assets are written down in line with the underlying assets. Paragraph 18 onwards, Appendix A, details the Treasury strategy. Paragraph 21 gives an overview of the economy, which is recovering. Today, interest rates rose to 0.5% and are expected to continue to rise in the medium term, reaching 1.25% by March 25. Inflation continues to increase due to soaring energy and commodity prices. Inflation is expected to peak during the year, falling back towards 2% by the end of 2023. Table 3, at paragraph 25, shows anticipated interest receipts. Paragraph 28, Appendix A, details the borrowing strategy, which sets limits for debt. Paragraph 30 details the authorised limit, which is the maximum we can borrow. And paragraph 31 details the operational boundary, the expected level. The TM code introduces the new indicator for the liability benchmark. This reflects the real need to borrow. Paragraph 33 shows the Council has no need to borrow medium term. Table 6 at paragraph 35 shows the proportion of financing costs to net revenue stream and shows the affordability of the Council's plans. The proportion reduces in later years as the net revenue stream increases in relation to the crematorium. And 26-27 sees a reduction in MRP as payments in relation to the arena come to an end. Table 7 shows the projected investment levels, which declined from 45 million in 21-22 to 21.6 million in 26-27. As capital resources are utilised to fund large projects. Paragraph 40 onwards details treasury management limits. These are set for purposes of minimising risk. Treasury limits are set by credit rating shown at table 8, with limits on values invested. Table 10 of paragraph 54 sets limits on investments by group. Counterparties are approved by our Treasury advisors, and these are shown at Appendix 1. Tables 11 and 12 show the limits on interest rate exposure and maximum investments over 1 year. Maximum investment over 1 year is set at 50% of sums available for investment. Paragraph 64 highlights another change of the updated TM code. Simple will require a tailored, recorded, and monitored training schedule to ensure that both members and officers dealing with treasury management are trained and kept up to date. There will be specific training for members involved in scrutiny and broader training for members who sit on full council. I'll now hand over to Sarah for the commission investments.
Okay. So from paragraph 66, refers to the investment properties and the commercial investments. And paragraph 67 reiterates the status at the moment that we're no longer investing in any commercial properties. And as a result of that, we would return to 3.828 million back into the capital programme, as we are no longer going to purchase any commercial property. There's a summary of the investments at Appendix 2. Paragraph 70 explains how the council monitors its performance, and this was last reported to Cabinet in December. Paragraph 73 and 74 talk about the reliance on commercial income. We have a target of 30%. We're currently outturning at 23%, so well below. Paragraph 75 shows how the risk is spread over different sectors and also over different asset values. Paragraphs 76 to 80 explains that we hold these assets predominantly for long-term appreciation, but we do maintain the assets and review them for liquidity if the need arises that we need to dispose of them. And then appendix 1, as referred to, has got our counterparties. Appendix 2 has our asset values as of 31st March 21 and 20.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Marie, for highlighting some of the key points and contents of the report. So it's quite a comprehensive report, which I'm sure our members have read it in detail, particularly with our recent Treasury management training, and understand every aspect of it. So hopefully we'll have lots of scrutiny questions. We've covered obviously the capital prudential indicators, minimum reserve policy, treasury management and strategy, as well as commercial investments within those reports. And there is clearly quite a lot of content and activity. So I will come back in a moment. I have a series of questions, but I'll open it up to members to pick up on any of the points you've made before I do that. So Russia hands in.
Just to reiterate all what you've said is that the majority of the indicators in there were recognised from the scrutiny in the previous strategies, but there are some new elements to it, which I believe is Appendix B, and they're summarised in there. So the main ones of which are reliability indicator, benchmark indicator, and the trade.
Just on that, so is the operational boundary one an existing one?
Yes.
So do members have questions for Marie or Sarah on our capital investment strategy? Councillor Butler.
Not so much on the strategy, but the paragraph referring to member and officer training. So just to clarify, this is a requirement set on a national. So is it a law?
The treasury management code doesn't have any legal status, but it obviously is recommended practice.
And we recently carried out training.
Yeah, so what will basically happen is Link will obviously involve training, that's what we've training previously. But Link are actually getting stuff working on the guidance and steer, and obviously doing research and a series of courses on training, specifically designed to the industry. So we will take courses.
And this might be a difficult one to answer, so don't worry, but how are we doing with the training at the moment? So training we've had to date, do we know how many sessions we've had, whether it's mental or officers, and are we ahead or behind, or what's the schedule or missing? I appreciate you.
I think at this stage it's probably difficult to think for that reason we're waiting for SIPRA and Leap to sort of pull out sort of almost like a plan that we can work to. But I think at some stage we probably will have to do some sort of gap analysis in terms of the skills that people already have and the training that you have done in the past to see where the areas of weakness are.
We historically link every year about November, December time, giving officers training. But obviously, you know, that's the input to the council, that's the term one. You might consider specific details, and that's where we get to.
Yeah, this is a thought going through not mine, because at the end of the day, members or most members, it's not our scene. It's quite complicated. So how do we decide what sort of knowledge the members need to have? Is there a sort of
That's what they created for research teams. Yeah. So imagine like the members, council members, training that they providing and they be sufficient. Obviously, they can cost, you know, look at what sort of resources they expect you to be able to deal with.
and then I assume the authority needs to sort of have some sort of record.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I think attendance will be cool. If so, you actually have to not be right. So we want to gain from it. But it's that sort of utility.
So do we know when we might need to get to?
Yeah, the TM code and the credential code, well, the credential code comes into immediate effect for saying you can't borrow privileges, but the reporting side of this, which is this reporting and the training, it's something like touching on, which is not really supposed to come to yeah.
No, we're not quite.
Yes, exactly. So we think that's a good strategy this year. We have tried to include it, but yeah, that's what to drop.
I think, thank you, Marie, for those clarifications. I think Councillor Butler raises a very good point there. This is a very technical and very complicated area, I think. And although personally I'm quite familiar with it, I think the training was very valuable that we had recently. Talking to fellow sort of members, you know, it was very sort of insightful. So I think ensuring that we maintain that training and knowledge and awareness is really important, particularly this committee and this group rather, and ensuring that we can scrutinise, which is what I really. So thank you for clarifying that. Any further questions or thoughts raised from members? Councillor Brett.
Just a quick one, you know, at table 13, where our commercial property income increases as we go towards 2027. The running costs seem to go up initially. This is reaction based on inflation, but then sort of seems to stay steady again, not sort of on the.
I think the majority of the cost increases in their business rates, which tend to stay static and not very consistent, you know, properties at which point will change.
Yeah, some insurance and things like that.
Yes, yes.
Any further questions from members? Councillor Barton,
Yeah,
you were coming in there.
I've lost the place of thought, so sorry about this, but referring to the borrowing of the authority. Can I may have missed it, but because we said that for many years the authority wasn't borrowing. Is that still the case, or did you say we were borrowing, or is it internal? Right. So is it, again, a bit simple, but is that literally where you're moving one sort of you're wiring from one budget to another? So it's all so is there any external? So it's still not borrowing external.
So this time last year, I think it might be to external.
That was that was going through my mind.
Yeah. That will,
That's good. Given what's going on.
It's very good, very good.
Thank you.
Any further points, questions from members? If I may, Marie and Sarah, come back to one or two points in that case. On page 70, table 1, I noted the capital receipts profile is changing dramatically from 15.2 million in the 21-22 year, and estimates, in 23, 4 and 4.5 going down to 4 million and 1 million. So I was just wondering whether you could help us understand that trend.
Basically, which sort of trying to find our reserves and cash receipts, just utilize them, make a payment. And that's the reason on the side. That is a pretty controversial view on some yourself. Cash receipts.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. My next question was actually based on table 2. So table 2 is obviously, I think this is what Councillor Butler was asking about also in terms of, sorry, was it the same?
Yes, it's table 2. Thank you.
So on table 2, this is showing that the closing CFR is going down, obviously. And also there's reference to investment income. So my question is, what is the impact on the investment income with the profile of the CFR?
Do you mean in terms of interest receipts?
Yes, investment income, sorry.
The investment balances are obviously linked to other expenditure as well, like expenditure and things like that. So whilst we are reducing the CFR by virtue of the NRP reductions, there are other things happening as well. So the bottom line that you can see on there is the investment.
Yeah.
And all of these things.
It's not just commission investment, it's just total resources.
Okay. So a related question to that is on page 74, paragraph 25, it's table 3, I think. The investment interest from investment is profiled almost the same over the next few years, 592,000 to 539,000. So between 550 to 590, I think, in the table. So I was interested in terms of how we maintain that level of investment interest when the amount available for investment has gone down so much. Table 3, Marie. So table 3, the expected interest from investments is around about 500,000, close to 600,000 this year. I'm just wondering how we're maintaining that level of investment income when the amount available for investment is going down. I'm assuming the actual amount invested is pretty much the
It's in
same.
relation to that, if I'm wrong, rates, the fact that the interest rates are also coming up at the same time as ours, slightly down. Also, that the majority of our funds are invested in higher earning accounts.
That's totally correct. So basically what we do is we have a lot of funds on deposit current accounts, things like that. We tend to use liquid cash flows as long-term investments. company policy first, and it's the loss of these limiting interest. So obviously we just use the out to try to make
Okay, oh, thank you for that clarification. I don't want to hog the floor here. Other members want to come in, please put your hands up if you don't like today. But a final one for me then was really around the code is quite clear in terms of our advisors, who are linked treasury advisors. You know, we have to make a final decision on our sort of investments and so on. So the question is, I don't know whether you're able to answer it or not, but obviously as advisors, they will be steering and guiding us towards, from their experience, what their view of the markets is. We ultimately make the decision. But I'm curious to know how we distinguish between what is advice and how that turns into a decision, you know, in terms of officers and sales authority.
In terms of
Maybe a bit subjective, I know the question.
the link policy, we do follow Link's guidance because they're experts in their field, so they would tell us we never go against what Link are advising in terms of our counterparties. They're on our list, but then they say that they're advised not to invest with them, wouldn't. Ultimately, the decisions do come down to us, and this is why I think so we're starting to focus a bit more on the members and officers being fully trained, and we have to make sure our officers are regularly trained so that we can have our MiFID status too, so that we are professionals in the treasury management field. So whilst we take their decision on board, we also have skills within the team as well, so the team know what they're doing. But ultimately the final decisions from members.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. It's not an easy one to answer. I know I use professional advisors as well in my own profession, and you know what constitutes advice and support. It is very difficult to go against that, but we have to ensure as an authority, and as you said, the training and so on, we are able to actually do that. So thank you for that. I don't have any more questions myself in this particular report, but I will open the floor up again to members before we move to the recommendation. Councillor,
I'm sorry if I'm hogging here, but queer paragraph 67, 68 doing commercial property investment. Just so I'm clear, paragraph 67, council welcome this is being self-sustainable and taking decision to no longer invest in fund or in property commercial investment. And then paragraph 68 there says we acquire through business units. So I presume those were purchased before we took the decision to no longer invest. And so the property that we had we already invested, we've still got, and so whatever income we're getting. So simply no future.
That is a key point for the prudential.
Yeah.
The prudential code that got amended in December is quite clearly saying that borrower to invest in commercial. So we have previously, we didn't mean to invest in, but it is.
So that's the national code. It's not just.
There was a point as well, if I recall, when Civil were putting this revised code together, there was a bit of a grey area as to whether the recommendation to not borrow to invest meant that you have to dispose of all your commercial properties, but I have confirmed that we don't have to do that. It's to going forward.
What we did then. Thank you.
thank you, Councillor Butler. Actually, I will come back to one other point, and that is in paragraph 4.6, A64, commercial investments, there is reference to the council decision to no longer invest on property for commercial gain. And again, going back to Sarah, you made reference to the dependency on commercial income ratio to keep it under 30%, and the profile noted on table 13 is approximately 22 to 24%. So again, just seeking clarification in terms of the relationship between that decision and our investments moving forward and how we're maintaining that. I think I may have sort of asked the question already when you referred to the you know, the profile of how we're sort of managing our investments and rates and so on. But is that factoring in that decision, or is that just based on our current portfolio?
That's based on the current portfolio, the fact that it's not going to change because we're never going to assets. But you're right in that had we continued to do what the Shell Centre at that point in time, it would then be part of the decision.
It could change slightly. You can still follow a bit like something like that. If you do a project that's primarily for regeneration, which is so if I want to industrial units or offices or anything attached to that park, you're not doing that scheme for that purpose, but it may as like regional.
All right, thank you for those responses. I have those questions. So unless there are any
One clarification. So on relating table 13 to paragraph 65, where we show the income spread by sector as sort of show how we're spread the risk. By that bar chart to me seems to be, I mean, it looks like it's very spread there. We've got 240s and then some small sections. But I think if you add up the sections that are in retail property, retail property, commercial property, that's sort of 90% to 10%, and it starts to look less of a spread of risk. And I mean, is that breakup something that comes? I suppose are those sectors very much spread, or is that risk actually slightly more concentrated in that pie chart would suggest?
I think the risk in that pie chart, they are very much different between the retail and industrial sites.
Yeah.
The retail sector, I know, was quite heavily impacted by COVID, whereas industrial sites weren't necessarily. So I think the fact that they all seem like commercial investments, they are very different.
Okay. Okay. Last offer. I don't see any further hands up, so we'll move to the recommendation, which on page 66, paragraph 8, recommendations. There are a number here actually. So the governance scrutiny group are asked to approve, scrutinise and forward for approval rather at full council the capital strategy and capital prudential indicators report, the minimum reserve provision statement, which actually we haven't touched on specifically. Is there any comments, Sarah or Marie, on that in terms of the statement, or any material changes? Because I mean, when I looked at it, it is what it is in the document. But are there any deviations or material changes from our policy or previous?
No, there's no change to one. In one strategy. There is no reason to change it.
C was the treasury management strategy, which we've looked at in detail. Commercial investments indicators, which we've been through. So therefore, I will seek members' approval that this particular item, these reports, can be recommended from forward consideration by full council. So alternative views, no. Okay, so we'll minute that as recommended. Thank you very much. In which case, we are moving on to item number 8. Thank you, Marie, for your contributions and highlighting the report. Risk management. So can I ask Charlotte to take us through item number 8? Thank you, Charlotte. My apologies, 7.
Is
there a number 8?
Well, actually, yeah. Okay. My piece of paper here, it's number 8, Tracy. So my apologies, Charlotte.
I don't think it matters what number this item is given. It's risk management. It's your
Absolutely.
6 monthly updates.
Yes.
The internal risk management group met earlier on in January, and there are currently 45 corporate risks and 33 operational risks now outlined at paragraph 4.2 of this report. Appendix A, if you want to flick through that, presents the council's risk register, and currently at this point in time, it presents 2 new risks. 1 risk has been removed, 3 risks have been increased, and the risk rating for 2 risks have been reduced. And paragraph 4.3 of the report details those increases and reductions. So for the purposes of this evening's meeting, in terms of increases, the threat of industrial action, the likelihood has increased from a 2 to a 3. And this is a result of disagreement between employers and unions nationally about pay increases. The latest update that we have on that position is that ballots are taking place, but turnouts are too low to trigger action, and a watching brief is being maintained by the Chief Executive. Failure to determine major planning applications within 13 weeks of the agreed period, the likelihood has increased from a 1 to a 2, over concerns related to a 42% increase in the number of applications received so far this year, and a number of staff leaving Rushcliffe for other authorities. Close monitoring of performance measures is taking place. Additional staff have been recruited from agencies and Capita and are providing specific support on major applications to ensure progress is being made. We've also been interviewing today for new planning officers, and that has been a successful process. Loss of income as a result of planning application fees linked to the one above. In terms of risks that have been reduced, we have reduced the risk of our inability to demonstrate a 5-year housing target or housing supply at new housing sites, simply because at the moment we have a supply exceeding the target. Should that change again in the future, obviously we will reassess the risk. And secondly, inadequate resources to respond to flooding incidents. We have reduced the risk on this on the basis that we have a very well now established flood response team in place who are on call when flooding is expected and also outside of those times in order to respond and provide households with the support that they need. In terms of new items to the risk register, there is a new risk on increased ASB or other offences connected to the use of a property in the borough as an asylum contingency hotel. And the borough has no control over its use or its occupants. However, we are monitoring the situation very closely with Serco. And the new opportunity risk that has been included at Appendix B relates to county deals. And members will be aware that this week has been very strange. One day this week, Nottingham and Nottinghamshire were put forward as the pilot, or one of the pilot authority areas on the county deal. So I imagine that will be fleshed out very certainly as the details become more. More than happy to answer any questions that you have. Risk register.
Thank you very much, Charlotte, for that overview. So I will immediately open it up to members. Councillor Butler.
The risk management, does it meet regularly? Is it fixed? Is it ad hoc meeting? When does it meet? I see it met in January earlier.
It met in January. Just trying to remember. It definitely meets every time before I come and sit here, so that I know what to say. But yes, it meets twice a year. I'm fairly certain it doesn't meet more frequently.
Oh, right. Okay.
But in terms of how risks are monitored, just to put more flesh on that, it's not just that every 6 months the risk management group meets. So risks are monitored and on a day-by-day basis by team leaders and managers, and service managers will monitor them every other month in their performance clinics. So we have a really good look at all sorts of performance, finance data, staffing, and such like risks are involved in that. So it's a very active system that runs right the way through the year, not just in preparation for coming tonight.
No, that's brilliant. Again, as we know, it's the environment, coping with all the rest of it. I'm just curious whether you need to sort of call urgent meetings or whatever, but now you're telling me that they're basically pleased to hear about the planning comments, because that has been has had an impact on the authority in so many ways in terms of determining planning applications and reputation, and possibly financial challenges as well. It can be fine, can't be. So,
Can it?
Fingers crossed.
Thank you, Councillor Butler, for that question.
Chair, sorry to trouble.
Thank you, Councillor Butler, for that question. Actually, it does remind me of a previous discussion in this group, and I think Charlotte did also reassure us then as well that it's not just a cyclical process of twice a year. It's a real-time process in terms of risk management, which is what we would expect. Otherwise, there wouldn't be much point in having a risk register. Do any other members want to ask any further questions of Charlotte? Yes. In which case, Charlotte, I've got a couple of, well, I did have two, but actually you've probably answered them, in fact. First one was actually about the industrial action. When I saw that in terms of ORCD 04, I think it was, yeah. I think you clarified that's a national code dispute, not something that we weren't aware of going on there.
It's not a local issue, it's just being a little bit more cautious because of the national issue.
Yeah, okay. And the second one, again, you made reference to this, I think, but and it does go back to Councillor Butler's comments around the capacity issues and so on, and planning applications and so on, some of the issues we've had there. I think you mentioned that we are undertaking a recruitment campaign. So I was personally seeking assurance in terms of what is happening in that area, because it has been on the register for a while. So I'm just wondering whether we're de-escalating the risk at all. It seems to be about the same.
I don't think that we're in a position to de-escalate the risk at the moment. So since the beginning of this year, we've had a 42% increase in the number of applications coming in. What we've also had is a number of key members of staff moving on to other authorities, and those are both in sort of what we call principal planning officer levels. So these are team leader positions and also planning officers. It's very difficult at the moment to recruit professional officers in a number of different fields, planning being one of them. What we've been able to do is we've had new recruits at principal planning officer level and a new post created. So we now have 4 principal planning officers, and we also have an agency member of staff working at that level in terms of managing the staff, providing us with a bit of extra capacity, signing off the big applications. We've also recruited 2 new planning officers into posts that were vacant. I think we will still, after today, still have 2 vacant posts that will go back out for adverts. But we have also been able to bring in a number of agency staff who are professional planning officers working in the field, who would come in to give us some support and fill in those positions, and also a designated consultant from Capita who is assisting us with major applications to make sure they stay on track. So we are addressing the gaps that we have in terms of the staffing and also bolstering it up to deal with the increase in planning applications, in the hope that we rebalance the number coming in and the number of determinations being made. Now, over July, August, September and October, we had more coming in than were being determined. Actually, November and December and January, we're seeing that balance being readdressed. And actually, December and January, we had more being determined than we had coming in. We're getting it.
Thank you, Charlotte, for that insight. Any further questions from members? Just, if I don't see any hands up, just picking up on that point from myself, Charlotte. So one of the recommendations for this group is not only to note the contents of your report, which we're doing, and scrutinising some of the content. Also considering progress, obviously, which again we're touching, but 8C, the recommendation is specifically asking this group in terms of the red alert risk areas and recommendations. Now, I have noted, although there is some colour coding there, certainly the ones with a number 9. And again, you know, there is a pattern of some of these having been here for a while. Some of them I can understand why, and just to go through them very quickly. the impact on our leisure facilities and recovery, which, again, due to the pandemic, lockdowns and so on, I think that has maintained a high status, rating rather. Similarly, if there was another wave in terms of the pandemic, again, that can be sort of factored in. But the question I have around all of the 9s that we have, what specific actions in some of those capacity issues you've mentioned already, staffing capacity, so that is being addressed. But in terms of recommendations around these areas for us as a group, in terms of moving forwards, the assumption is that officers are looking at taking mitigating actions, corrective measures, and so on. We haven't necessarily discussed those in detail. So, is there a response you can provide in terms of those final areas, Charlotte, to ensure?
We haven't discussed them in detail this evening, but we have brought additional information to previous meetings that outlines both the controls and mitigations for the red indicators as they are shown here. The thing with controls and mitigations is that they don't change very much. They just stay as they are, and actually until the situation changes, the risk stays red. Now, red isn't necessarily that there's a major problem here. It just means that the likelihood is that we're keeping an eye on this at a greater depth than something that is a lower risk or is going to have a lower impact that perhaps is amber or then green.
Yes, indeed. And I think you mentioned earlier on in response to Councillor Putnam's questions, it is a different process. And I think the point you made about the fact that it's not just twice a year, 3 times a year, it is on a daily basis, which our manager officers are actually doing. So that does provide reassurance. I mean, I think members do have the report to scrutinize and the details of those mitigating actions. You're absolutely right. So okay, I will, if there are no further questions in that case, move to the recommendations, which I know also what page it was, but just 97. Thank you, Councillor. So the group are asked to note the contents of the report, consider the progress made, and also the sort of progress on the red alerts and the assurance provided in terms of the ongoing and real-time management of those key risks. So I will ask our members: Are we satisfied and assured that the report does provide that assurance? Yes, I don't see any alternate views. So Tracy, we can record that as accepted in the recommendations. Thank you very much, Charlotte. In which case we are on to our final agenda item, which is the work program. So I don't know if you want to make any comments on this, but clearly we have moved some items around recently. We have looked at our internal, we have looked at the forward plan for our internal audit strategy and so on in terms of future sort of meetings. But do you want to sort of highlight anything in terms of the current work program?
Yeah, so in terms of the next meeting, which you also know has moved from May now to June, also has on it the 2 portfolio items that should have been at this meeting in relation to the external audit plan and also the annual audit letter, which increased the value from the stakeholder. Two items now will be brought to the June meeting.
And again, just for members, in terms of clarification, the reason given in paragraph 1.3 is, well, I'll perhaps allow you to clarify what we have been notified in terms of why those items have not been delivered when they were going to.
Yeah, in terms of their delivery, they have, along with lots of audit firms across the country, been struggling with resources. So unfortunately, they've not delivered upon their voluntary conclusion and able to produce their audit better for the deadline that we needed to arrive at this meeting. So it's referring to the next one. I'm confident it will be done by then. We are sure it will be returned to us very soon.
Related to that, the annual sort of statement of accounts, there was a knock-on effect from last year's accounts, and I think we do have this year leeway to sort of slip again. But do you have an indication of how that might pan out in terms of forward work plans?
In terms of negotiations with themselves at the moment, for doing you're right in that we have the statutory instrument has allowed us to extend the closure of accounts and therefore the audit deadline is extended as well. But I do need to work with themselves in terms of the dates that they can resource to auditors and also when the accounts will be complete for them to do that work. That will then obviously not come to bring the accounts to the group later in the year.
So perhaps we'll ask members at this stage, are we content with the proposed June meeting? It's quite a packed agenda. I don't know if members will add to that or perhaps have any views on whether that is the sort of right content. That's what you
I think on the opening group the week there's also the code of conduct item placed in the June meeting as well. Certainly work on shared.
That's correct. Yeah.
So there is in fact another item then. Tracy, sorry. Okay, so there is an additional item. Okay. That is quite a lot in that particular meeting, Sarah. I don't know what scope we would have to consider that because I think I don't know what our members feel, but I think to be able to give due diligence, have a diligent approach and actually scrutinise appropriately, we do have to manage the sort of contents in each of the meetings. So at the moment, it is appearing rather on the.
I think, like you say, the knock on from the external audit items we've gone to this meeting, but I think the other items, as in government statement, do have to be approved. Yeah. So I'm not sure what scope there is to move to amend yeah, that's an option to
Okay, so if we didn't hear that, the proposal was potentially having an earlier meeting, giving us more time. So perhaps that's something we'll look at and we'll communicate that to.
Also take away.
Yeah. Good. All right. In which case, that is our final item. I would like to thank our members for their contributions and scrutinising quite a packed agenda even today, and also our internal auditors for the presentation of their and indeed our officers. So on that note, we can note the meeting has concluded at 8:23. I think. Thank you very much. Have a safe journey. Thank you.